get started. Okay. Welcome everyone to the continuation of our TBO Adult Education series on Shalom You All on Jews of the South. I am Annette Havison. Tonight we are very pleased to have a panel discussion from 4 members of our synagogue who grew up in the South. Our panel members include Jeff Dinner, Rob Myers, Harriet Weinstein, and Ed Stein. Larry Perlman and I will be the moderators of this program. We will each be asking our panel members specific questions. Larry and I will monitor the chat box of questions from our attendees this evening. We ask our panel members to please uphold the Temple's mission of inclusiveness in your answers. I will begin by introducing each panel member, who will briefly introduce themselves, including who they are, where they were raised, how long they have lived in the Raleigh area, and if they were raised Reform, Conservative, Reconstruction, or we also will be showing very, very nice pictures of each panel member's synagogue at the time that they do their introduction. Larry will be doing the wrap up of this panel program at the end. We hope that you enjoy this very interesting panel discussion of our Temple members. So we will start out with Ed Stein. If you could introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about your background.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ed Stein. I was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1942 on an area of Richmond which was called Church Hill. Now, Church Hill was a large population of Jews in the just pre-war and after the World War, okay? And it was consolidated somewhat like what you would see up north. There were, in Virginia, there was 3 major areas of Jews. There was Norfolk, Virginia Beach area, there was Richmond, and then Northern Virginia, the Alexander area. There were small pockets of Jews in Roanoke and Danville, but most little towns did not have Jews in them. I didn't feel like that I was raised in a small town. All of my friends were Jewish. I went to school with them. Now, but what did happen, because Church Hill was right next to the black neighborhood, over time, the Jews moved up to the west end of Richmond. The temple that you're seeing here, Temple Bethel, was the temple in which I was bar mitzvahed in. It was a conservative temple, although in my early years with my grandfather, I was at the Orthodox shul, which also later moved up to the west end. And Bethel Harbor was the main Reform shul. Now, it was a very cliquey society. Conservatives stayed together, Orthodox stayed together, and nobody talked to the Reform, okay? That was the attitude back in those days. And remember, we're talking about days when everything was segregated, and when I left, I was in Richmond until 1962. I was almost 20 years old, and I went up to Virginia Tech, and there was no Jews up there. If there were, they hid, okay? Virginia Tech's in Blacksburg, Virginia, a southern state. And then for a short while, I came back to Virginia after the military, but then the rest of my life, most of it, was spent all around the world, from Malaysia to California to Texas, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. As far as in those days, I was a 3-day-a-year Jew, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, because I didn't count Passover and Hanukkah. They were just in-house things that we did, all right? And we did them religiously. We didn't go to Shabbat services unless there was something special. And when I moved here, because my son was here at the time, he was a member of TBO, so Becky and I decided to be members of TBO so we could be close to him. And I found that it was very relaxing to come to shul on Friday night and Saturday. And for the most part, I've continued to do that since 2005 when I moved here. Now, I don't know that I would want to go back to the conservative movement. I'm so pleased with the reform movement. A big surprise considering the way I grew up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ed. Our next panel member is Rob Myers.
Hi there. Okay. Yes. Before I get into my personal story, I'd like to talk about my Jewish Southern roots. So getting on this panel sort of gave me the impetus to dig further into what I knew about my roots and wanted to share some of the interesting things. So on my father's side, his mother's grandmother, so my great-great-grandfathers, Emanuel Lieberman, arrived from Germany in 1938, and by 1941, he was in Louisville, Kentucky, in the shoe business. My other paternal great-great-grandfather, Isaac Bach, arrived in the US from Germany in 1964. He was in Louisville by 1870, but I suspect he was actually in a census. I found that out. I suspect he was there earlier, and I'm still digging for that. The son of Emanuel Lieberman was Leon Lieberman. In 1965, he and his wife, Regina Bach, moved from Kentucky to Atlanta, Georgia, so right after the Civil War, and opened the luggage business there. And Leon was one of the 10 men who founded the Hebrew Benevolent Congregation in 1867, and that later became the temple, the Reformed temple that exists in Atlanta today. So on my mother's side, I have a maternal great-great-grandfather, Wolf Barnett, who came over to this country age 13 from England and moved quickly to Savannah. That was in 1830. He was 13 years old. My other maternal grandfather, Theodore Bash, was born in Savannah in 1849, not able to find out when his father came to Savannah. My grandfather, Sidney Victor, my mother's father, age 9, the Victor family moved from New York down to Savannah. And by 1900, age 20, he was a traveling salesman or traveling agent. By 1910, my father, I was born in Atlanta in 1946. My father moved us from Atlanta to Savannah to take a job with my grandfather, Sidney, who had a wholesale business selling millinery, children's wear, ladies' handbags to the various department stores in South Carolina, North Carolina. And Harriet is nodding her head because her family owned one of those stores. So my father was a traveling salesman. My congregation, as you see, growing up was Mikveh Israel. The building that you're looking at is a English Gothic design, and it was dedicated in 1878. The temple started off as a Sephardic Portuguese Orthodox congregation, back in 1733, when a group of about 48 Jews from England, sponsored by the Bevis Marks Synagogue, arrived in Savannah. And among those Jews was a doctor in Savannah at that time, was having a yellow fever epidemic. He came off the boat. He had experiences with epidemics, and after he arrived, there were no further deaths. In 1735, Congregation Mikveh Israel was established, and in 1904, it joined the Reform movement. And it was, when I was there, it was a classical Reform synagogue, complete with organs and choir.
Thank you. It's absolutely beautiful. Okay, the next panelist is Jeff Dinner.
Good evening, everybody. I'm definitely the youngest one in this panel, that's for sure. I grew up in a small, and I mean small community in Mississippi called Anguilla. It was a farming community of about 600 Jews. I mean, excuse me, 600 people. 600 people, and there were only like 14, 15 Jews, and we were all family. The town, actually, I had family who, like most Jews at that time, especially the men, were traveling salesmen. Somehow or another, one of my relatives was traveling down through that area back in the 1870s, 1875, I think. And somehow or another, there was a guy already there who had found the town, somehow convinced him to stay there. I'm not sure how or why, but he did. And then when the rest of my family came over, they knew one cousin, and that's where he was. So they went to Anguilla. Like I said, it was 600 people. It was a farming community. We owned a farm. We farmed about 12 to 1,500 acres of cotton and soybeans. We owned a general mercantile store, which, your typical, you got groceries on one side, you got clothes on the other, you got furniture stuff upstairs, and you got small farm utensils out back in the warehouse. And, that's how our family made a living down there. And unfortunately, the building and we sold the farmland off years ago because even though I grew up on a farm, I had enough of that. So, so I still have family down there, which is good. It gives me a reason. You haven't been there in a while. It gives me a reason to go home. But we've been in Raleigh. I'm trying to think. I think we got here in '93. I think that's when we moved here. So, from the standpoint of how people have moved into Raleigh, we feel like we're basically a native at this point. And the congregation I grew up in Greenville, Mississippi, I didn't live there. I mean, Greenville was 45 minutes away. There wasn't another Jew my age in a 45-mile radius around my hometown. But that's where we went. That's where I went to Sunday school and went to temple and things of that nature. But it was a very classical reform. It was extremely classical. It's like we had the organs and everything else. I mean, it was strictly classical reform. So, but that's me.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, our last panelist is Harriet Weinstein.
Well, my name is Harriet Schreiber Weinstein, and I say all that because I have family on both sides that populated South Georgia. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, but I really was raised in Blackshear, Georgia. And you may know the name of the town Blackshear because it's on TV these days because of the University of Georgia's quarterback is from Blackshear, Georgia. So anyway, I perk up every time I hear it. The town is less than 2,000 people. And when I was growing up, there were 2 Jewish families. My 2 sisters and I and one other girl were the only Jews in 12 years of school there in the whole county. And my husband was born in Raleigh, and we came to Raleigh after our honeymoon. So I saw Temple Beth Or for the first time in 1958, and we still lived in Atlanta at that time. His mother lived here. And so then we moved to Raleigh in 1959. And that was very interesting because it gave me a little bit of a look at Raleigh before the explosion of Research Triangle. It opened in 1960 and the 60s were the big boom. But in 1959, there were less than 60,000 people in Raleigh, less than 3,000 people in Cary. And there were 2 congregations, Beth Meyer and Beth Or, and some members belonged to both. I'm going to tell you mostly about my growing up years in Georgia. My congregation was Waycross, Georgia, and that's a really beautiful little building that you see there, but that wasn't how it started out. When I first went to first went to Sunday school, this is 10 miles away. So Jeff, you put me to shame. I thought I traveled a long way with 10 miles, you with 45, but we had Sunday school over a restaurant bar across from the train station in Waycross. And the congregation it consisted of anybody that was Jewish in a 100-mile radius of Waycross. And there were very few families, but a lot of them were kin to me. And so some of the families there, including my parents and some other, decided we needed a more respectable looking place for the community. And that's really a whole lot of the emphasis. Growing up in a small town, you're very aware that people are forming opinions about Jews based on you, that you have a responsibility. And so that is a fantastic building for this small little community to have built. There's a stained glass window. That star is a stained glass window. And a member of the congregation, she and her husband made that stained glass. So it's like, I treasure the little building. It is still there. It is still, members conduct services on Friday night, and they hire a rabbi for the holidays. So I am very touched and proud to have come from this South Georgia place.
Harriet, was the congregation Reformed?
It was whoever breathed
Oh, okay.
Jewish. You could be interfaith married, you could be Orthodox, you could be Reformed, you could have had a cousin who was Jewish. It was like, we needed 10 people.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, the panel members, for your nice introduction. And I will be starting the questions. There are a total of 12 questions for designated panel members. I'm going to do the first 6, and then Larry will do the last 6 and do the wrap up. The first question is for Harriet and Rob. Rob, you touched upon this a little bit in your introduction. What kind of livelihood did the founding families of your community have?
Let me start off, and then Harriet, I will let you chime in.
Thank you.
Yeah, because we're really kind of, the founding members. So our founding members were from 1733. But just to give you an idea, in the 1750s, 2 of the families, both actually 2 of the German Jew families, Scheftel and Minnis, owned nearly 4,000 acres of farmland that they ranched around Savannah. They also were active in civic life, members of the Masonic Lodge, and one of them was appointed searcher of the port of Savannah. So those core people were already influential in the community. So Harriet, I don't know if you want to talk about the later periods.
Well, actually, that really ties in. My mother's family were Kronstadts. They were the German Jews too, already in Savannah. That's why my family came to Savannah, and the Candles and the Kronstadts there. So do you want to finish and then me go, or how do you want to do it? I mean,
why don't you go ahead and I'll, I have some other stuff and I'll chime in afterwards.
Okay. My story picks up kind of where last week, where Rob was talking about. My grandparents, my mother's parents came from Minsk in Russia, and my father's parents came from Warsaw in Poland. My maternal grandparents came in 1906, and we have the ship's lading with that, so we know where they came from. And they say on there, what they asked for, what relative, and Kronstadt is the relative, and this was what caused them to come there. You're seeing 2 pictures that are my father's. My father came from Russia, and the picture on the right is his family, missing one brother there. That's my father is the tallest one there in the middle. He came, and the grandfather, when the boys got to be teenagers, he sent them out peddling across South Georgia. And so they peddled, and one of the ladies in the store when I was growing up said her mother was a real good cook. And so the boys, the peddlers that would go through South Georgia would have little things like needles and threads and scissors and things to sell to the farm women. And they would time their visit to her mother's house right about late afternoon, because she was a really good cook. And so they would stay, they would know she would ask them to stay for dinner, and then they would give her something from the peddler's pack to pay them for the dinner. And as they moved around South Georgia, they settled down into different towns. My father was opened a store in Blackshear. I had another uncle that opened a store in Brunswick. Another uncle had a shoe store in Waycross. Another uncle had a store in Moultrie. So you can see that South Georgia was settled by these Jews who had come because they had relatives already here. The Savannah relatives had attracted them to there, and my father's family came to Brunswick because he had a sister. My father, I have great respect for him because he came to this country, and his name was Julius, but as soon as he got to this country, before he even spoke English, I think, they shipped him off to a little town, even littler than Brunswick, called West Green, to live with an aunt that he had never met before. And so he would work in the store that the uncle had, and afterwards he would play baseball with the boys, and they first called him Jew John, and then they dropped the Jew and called him John. And he really, he loved baseball all his life, and it was the connection that got him to that point. The boys did extremely well. My father died at 49, but by the time he died, he had established a store. He had bought farm and sharecropped tobacco with a farm. And one of the things that he did was he bought and sold pecans that he would buy from the farmers and sell to Funston's and some of these other companies. And that was really good for me because he had a truck, a little pickup truck that they used for pecans, and except we call them pecans in Georgia, but pecans because I've become educated. And so he used it from November till January for the pecans. And so at 13, I learned how to drive a truck, and I could drive a truck in South Georgia because the roads were very not busy and traveled and so on. I think one other thing that I really think is so important, the wives of these, my mother, her sisters, they were as important as the men in the store. That my mother worked in the store. She was about 19 when women got the vote, and these were all women who did their part in helping earn a living from the time they were in high school. And so she would help pick out the clothes and the fabrics and help supervise the clerks, and she worked in the store. And my father was free to do some of the other things that he did. He served on the board of a bank. He was in the Rotary Club. She was in Women's Club. And I really can't stress too much that living in a very small town, you either are a part of the community or you can't last in a small town. And so these Jews were both Jews and respected for their Jewishness, but they also participated very strongly within the community.
Okay,
Awesome,
thank you
Harriet.
very much.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
Annette, let me just kind of pick up on the last thing, if I could, that Harriet mentioned about being part of the community. So again, Savannah was very unique in the roles that Jews played. They held a lot of civic offices. So I'll list off some. Alderman from 1815 to 1900, sheriff 1813, police chief 1849, fire chief 1801, and we had a Jewish mayor, Herman Myers, no relation, in 1895.
Very
So,
important.
and it's also kind of just a personal story. So I think Ed was talking about how cliquish the different Jewish communities were in Richmond. Really not that way in Savannah. And I'll give you a great example. The Orthodox community, which originally had a synagogue downtown, decided to open up a larger synagogue out in close to my neighborhood. So before the synagogue got built, a lot of the Orthodox Jews moved out and started buying houses in my neighborhood. And they started holding Shabbat minyan services on Friday night. And when they were short of a person, I would get a phone call. Being over 13, being Jewish, being Reformed, I would show up at Benny Garfunkel's house and daven with the rest of them.
You. Thank you. Thank you, Rob and Harriet. Okay, the second question is for Jeff. What's your fondest memory of your temple?
Well, I think that because the temple was, I mean, it was small. We drew Jews from all over the area. You know, I think, like I said, 45-mile radius for me at least. I think it was just the closeness. Look, and Harry and Rob, y'all can speak to this because you grew up in a small, Harry especially, you grew up in a small southern community, and I grew up in the deep South. Okay, Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina. Y'all can say y'all in the South, which it is, but Mississippi is in the deep South. Okay, and you know, with only 16 of us in the town, and then you take in the community of the temple, it was a closeness. You know, there was, I kept trying to think what was one really, my fondest memory. It kind of all blends together because it was such a small community that, you did everything together. Everybody knew you, which is a good thing and a bad thing. But, it was just because the community, you really had no choice. Yeah, you blended in and you were integrated into the entire community, but with the temple itself, and keep in mind, when I was growing up there, the civil rights movement was hitting its stride. And that created tension, certainly in the area, in the entire South, for sure, but certainly in Mississippi. And, the fact that it was close-knit, and so to pick out one fond memory of the temple, it's kind of difficult. It's just the holidays were nice. It was a family type of feeling and everything. And my best friend growing up, he's still my best friend. Best men at each other's weddings and everything. That has carried forward all these years. So it's I can't pick out any one thing. It was just a nice communal family feeling with the whole congregation.
Thank you, with such a close-knit community. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jeff. Okay, question 3. What made you feel special about being Jewish? And this is for Ed and for Jeff.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay. That's like asking me, do I feel special because I'm a member of TBO? Remember, I grew up, unlike the others, I didn't grow up in a small community of Jews. I grew up in a large community of Jews, okay? And everything that I dealt with pretty much was Jewish. Not religious, but Jewish, okay? And so I never felt special about that. It was just a way of life. Now, when I say it was a large community and it was cliquish, the Reforms stuck together. We never talked to them. We didn't see them or very seldom saw them, okay? The ultra-Orthodox stuck together and the rest were split up between the very wealthy conservative Jews, like the Tallhammers, and those that were of a modest means, which was in my case, okay, except for I had a few cousins. And just to show you what I'm talking about the size of this community, I mean, parts of my family were among the Jewish mafia, okay? They ran numbers. I ran numbers, or I didn't do the act. I carried the bag, okay? It was just like it was in New York City and the Jews of New York City. You probably, other than it's a smaller count, but it was a very close-knit group of people. So you didn't feel special. You just felt, I'm Jewish. And you knew because you were Jewish, there were certain areas you didn't go in. There was areas that were restricted because only white Christians lived there. There was country clubs you didn't belong to. because they wouldn't allow Jews in. There was the black section, which you didn't go to. To the day my mother died, okay, she was afraid of blacks. Not because a black ever did anything to her, but because that was the way it was. And she was in that little Jewish pod, if you will. So she didn't see blacks or Christians that much, you know? So I didn't really feel special. I felt Jewish. And that was because my grandfather made us keep kosher for him. You know, you talking about Passover? Wait till you sit the 3 hours of Passover, all of it in Yiddish, okay? Then you know you're Jewish, especially when you're a kid. So, you know, it was nothing, it was that kind of a life. I think some of those that came from New York would have similar feelings to the way we did.
Okay, thank you. And Jeff, you touched a little bit upon this with your fondest memories, but if you wanted to elaborate about what made you feel special about being Jewish.
Well, I think what made me feel special, I did not even realize when I was growing up there. I think after I left, went to college, got married, moved and all that kind of stuff. And then I look back on it, some of the things that we did, you know, like I said, you know, you have a small community and you have only 16 Jews, 14, 16 Jews, and you're all family. And those are the only Jews in town. You know, it even though, like I said, I wasn't thinking I was doing it at the time, but in some respects, I was, you know, like one year, Rosh Hashanah fell on our homecoming football game. And my coach about went crazy because I had to tell him, Coach, I'm not going to be at the football game to play. But I showed up, I made a deal with my dad. I'll go to services, I'll come home, but I'm going to the dance. Okay. And everybody said, well, why do you play the football game? Well, I was at services. Of course, the deal was I had to get up the next morning and drive back to Greenville for Rosh Hashanah morning services too. But, you know, it was something that after I left, I realized that, you know, you kind of, people would ask you, well, what is this? So why did you do that? Where, you know, what is that holiday that you're celebrating or something along those lines? And, you know, I look back on it and I guess that was, you know, it gave me a special feeling that I was able to, unbeknownst at that time, but for me, that I was in fact, you know, educating some folks about, you know, what it's like to, what, you know, being Jewish and what this holiday means and what that holiday means. You know, I think that that to me, I think was pretty special. Like I said, it was not until I left that I realized, maybe I did, you know, maybe something was good in that standpoint. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, question 4. What were Shabbat and the major holidays like for you? This is for Harriet and Jeff. And Jeff, you touched upon it a little bit in the other question, what made you feel special about being Jewish? Is there anything you wanted to elaborate about Shabbat and the major holidays?
Well, you know, we didn't go to temple on Shabbat because we weren't going to drive 45 miles just because we'd have to come home and then, you know, and then go back to Sunday school on Sunday morning. So, and we did have Shabbat at home. We had, you know, we lit candles and said the blessings and everything. But, you know, once I got in high school, you know, depending on what season it was, I was either playing football, basketball, baseball, or track. So Friday nights, Shabbat, that was gone because I was, you know, my parents too, they weren't at home either. You know, they were out watching me playing ball. But the holidays, you know, especially Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, you know, we were at the temple. That was, you know, with the family. You know, Passover for sure, without question, you know, it was the whole family gathered around a table or tables. And, you know, when you look around, you're like, okay, you know, this is all family. This is not family. You know, there were no friends Jewish because you know, it was all, everybody was all, like I said, everybody in town was all the Jews were all related. You know, that was fun. You know, so I mean, it was nice. You know, but it wasn't you didn't make a big deal out of it or anything like that. It was just, it's what it was. Like I said, once I got in high school, Shabbat, that didn't happen. You know, so that went to the wayside real fast. But I think being married to Lucy, that's been made up and then some.
Yeah. Great comment, Jeff. And how about you, Harriet? How were the major holidays and Shabbat for you growing up?
Well, Shabbat, I have to agree with Jeff that I was a cheerleader all through high school, and my mother was too religious to come to the games on Friday night, but my dad always came. And since then, I've realized my mother did her very best to make good Jews out of us. She would come home from the store and light the candles and go back to the store. But the best holidays of all were Rosh Hashanah, because all of the family gathered in Savannah. I mean, 5 sisters and 2 brothers, and that meant I have 17 first cousins on one side of the family. We were all at one aunt's house, and we were there, and it was like the men would go to services, and the women and the children, which I thought was okay because we didn't have to go to services. They went to services, they prayed for us, and we got the dinner set up. It was a rolling, rocking house. And then the next day for services, we all stayed at the hotel downtown in Savannah. And for Blackshear, Georgia girls, we get to ride the elevator up and down. You don't know what a thrill that is. There's no elevator in Blackshear, that we get to ride the elevators, go to the movies. We thought the biggest treat in the world was to go to Morrison's cafeteria, because we didn't have that. And the parents all went to there was some catered something that had real Jewish food, and we were just too South Georgia for real Jewish food. And so we went to Morrison's cafeteria. And even during the war, when gas was so short, we found a way to get to Savannah for the holidays. Then with Yom Kippur, we did not go to Savannah. It was just one day. And so my parents closed the store for 2 days for Rosh Hashanah, for 1 day for Yom Kippur. So we stayed in Waycross for that. And to this day, I love chicken salad. I told you in the beginning, we had services upstairs over a restaurant bar, and then down the street was a drugstore that made the best chicken salad in the world. And so while everybody else was fasting and the children were too young to fast, my parents would say, okay, go down to Ellison's and get chicken salad sandwiches. And so we would go eat sandwiches. And so those are my holiday memories. By the time I was 13, I was always trying to catch up to my older sister, and she was fasting, so I wanted to fast. So the chicken salad sandwiches left at that point, and I fasted from then on. But my favorite memory is really Rosh Hashanah, and my mother changed dishes for Passover, and we had services and all of that other. And in a way, when I came to Raleigh, that was one of the hardest things for me, was because my view of the holidays was this very unscripted kind of family reunion kind of thing. And Al was Reformed, and their services were really structured. I mean, you sat down, we went to services the night before, and we went to services the next day. So it was different.
Thank you.
Annette, if I might just add one more thing, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
It's more in line, not with the Jewish holiday, but more in line with Christmas and and again, Harriet, I think you can relate to this in growing up in a small community like we did. Every Christmas, either the Methodist church or the Baptist church in town, all the kids, all the teenagers, whatever, they all went Christmas caroling. And, a couple of days before they would do that, one friend or a couple of friends would say, hey, you going to join us again going Christmas caroling? And we got a Methodist minister in town. He had gotten there that summer, and I showed up. A friend of mine said, hey, we're going to go Christmas caroling Saturday night. So I said, what time do I need to be at the church? He says 7 o'clock. I said, okay. So I showed up, and the minister looked at me like I'm lost. Okay. And he looked at me, he says, Jeff, and keep in mind, everybody knew everybody. He said, Jeff, can I help you? I said, no, I'm here to go Christmas caroling. He said, what? I said, oh, I've been doing this for years. He said, really? I said, yeah. He said, I'm sure you need a song sheet. I said, nah, I don't need one. I got these songs memorized. I don't need these things. And I found out that Monday morning when our store opened up, the minister came in and was talking to my father, and they had the biggest laugh over the whole thing because he figured this little Jewish kid is going Christmas caroling, and he didn't need a song sheet.
Mhm.
But that's what growing up in a small community, it was very much integrated.
And Vacation Bible School. I went to Vacation Bible School. I lived on Church Street. Whoever lived on Church something else, I lived on Church Street across from the Presbyterian Church. And they served really good popsicles. So I went to Vacation Bible School, and they gave me Old Testament readings they knew I was Jewish. They would say, okay. And it really was stressful because my Jewish background didn't talk about chapter and verse and all of this like theirs did, studying the Bible. So it really was very good for me. It made me kind of learn Old Testament and kind of learn that, appreciate that they expected that of me. So I needed to know that.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, question 5. What was the kindest thing someone did for you because you were Jewish? This is for Jeff and Ed. Whoever would like to.
Start, Jeff?
Was that? Go ahead, Ed.
Huh?
Go ahead.
Sure. First, I kept trying to find something, and I guess, I don't know whether it was kindness or just I was elected president of AZA, which was a Jewish high school fraternity, okay? And I was well accepted within the boys that I grew up with. The funniest thing, I guess, was when I learned that my bar mitzvah was pin day. And my uncle gave me a fountain pen for my bar mitzvah. Turns out that back in those days, all right, in the 50s, when you were bar mitzvahed, one of the gifts had to be a fountain pen, at least in Richmond. So, I always felt that's in Virginia. The kindest thing that ever happened to me as a Jew is when I was in Malaysia. And I was very concerned as a Jew, I was the senior manager for this plant we were building, and over 80% of the people there were Muslim, okay? And I was concerned that I would be accepted or I would have problems because I was Jewish. They would relate Muslim, Jew, Israel, and there would be, and quite the contrary. I was accepted into the community. Muslims have a similar ceremony to bar mitzvah in that when a boy becomes 13, he is supposed to read from the Quran. I was invited to about 7 of those as an honored guest to see the boy read. It was like, they just accepted you, which totally surprised me. I was sure as a Jew, I was going to run into all sorts of problems. That did not happen. It made me realize that in many parts of the world, Jews aren't looked at as negative on an individual basis. Maybe Israeli policy might not be well, but Jews themselves are well accepted throughout the world.
Thank you for your local and your international perspective. And how about you, Jeff? What was the kindest thing someone did for you being Jewish?
There's been several, but there was one that stands out more than anything else. And it's still like this. I mean, when I was growing up, it was, every school function, every meeting, every sporting event, everything began with a prayer. Silent prayer, mostly it was broadcast over the PA system, and everything was, in Jesus' name, amen. Well, we had our baccalaureate for graduation, and I was the first Jewish kid to graduate from my high school. And one of my classmates' father was, I can't remember if he was a Methodist or a Baptist minister. I can't remember which one, but he was charged with giving the invocation. Well, when you grow up in that area, you just got used to hearing it. It just came it just became, okay, you know what the end of the prayer is going to be like. You just move on. I know a lot of people today get all their feathers ruffled and everything. I'm very different. It's kind of like, I was so used to it growing up. I don't even give it a time of day. But when and of course, my mom who grew up in that area, was dead set sure she's going to hear everything. We're going to hear everything about in Jesus' name, amen. Well, Reverend Neal started this prayer, and it was about as generic as you could get it. And at the end, now, I don't know if it was because I was the Jewish kid in the class, or the first Jewish kid who had graduated from that high school, but when he finished that prayer, he just simply said, amen. Mm-hmm. When I looked out, I happened to be looking at my parents and my family, all my family was out there. I think all our heads turned. I mean, it's surprising there wasn't a massive case of whiplash because we had never had that experience, because everything else had been done as it normally would have, normally we figured it would be done. But my father asked him afterwards, and he did say, he said, look, Jeff's a member of the class. He's not Christian. So what's it going to hurt? Maybe my congregants may get upset with me, but he said, I'm not too worried about that either. That, of all the things that have happened, that were nice about being Jewish, and nice things that were happening, that stands out. Even after all these years, that still stands out as the most, I would say, impressive act of kindness that I've ever experienced, as far as being Jewish.
That is very impressive. Thank you for sharing that. That's a great story. The last question that I will be giving before Larry finishes the rest of the questions is, how are Jews represented in the community? And this is for Rob.
Okay, so I'm assuming that question was as I was growing up.
Yes.
So in our community, there were a lot of Jewish merchants. So there was one main shopping street in Savannah, Broughton. And on that street, there were 3 Jewish department stores: Levy's, Adler's, and Fines. There were 2 men's clothing stores that I could remember: Barry and Lesser's. There was a women's clothing store called Lady Jane. All of these were owned by Jews. Shoe store, the Globe Shoe Store. Fine jeweler store, Levy's. We had also a wonderful delicatessen, Gottlieb Delicatessen. We had grocery store owned by Jewish family, M&M's. We had innumerable Jewish doctors, dentists, lawyers, and there were Jews also were big in the real estate and insurance business.
Very, very impressive.
I'd also kind of like to say, it's just listening to Ed, just contrasting the 2 different communities. So, and in Savannah, we had a Jewish Educational Alliance, kind of like JCC. And the members were Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. We all got together and played games there, basketball, and had social events there. And there was a Jewish swimming team that I was on, and we competed in city meets. So it was really sounds like quite a different culture between 2 relatively similar sized cities.
And the Alliance was there when my mom was a girl in the 1916 and 1918. The Alliance was there for a long, long time.
Right. Yeah. Well, before it was in its present location as a kid, when I was a couple of years old, maybe 3 or 4 years old, I went to the old JEA downtown.
It's like that in Richmond to some extent now, because remember I told you that Jews migrated to the West End. Well, now they've migrated way out into the far West End in Henrico County, and now there is a more closeness of it. But back in the days when I grew up, each group kind of stayed to itself. But what you were talking about, Rob, there were all sorts of Jewish department stores and, grocery stores and local, many of them were in the Black communities. Many of the friends that I had, their fathers ran little grocery stores in the Black community in there. And then there were the fine jewelry. And then, of course, Tallhammer's, which is is now part of Macy's, a very large department store there in Richmond.
One of the things that, you talk about department stores and all this kind of stuff and so forth. Look, and Harry, I know you can speak to this. Ed, I'm sure you can. Rob, I'm sure you can, being in the South. I guarantee you remember seeing signs that said whites only, coloreds only, this side. I mean, I remember just growing up, in the doctor's office, whites on one side, and it said coloreds on the other side.
Mhm.
And our family store, there was a front entrance and a back entrance. And until I was about, I don't know, maybe 10, if a Black person came in the store, they had to come in through the back. They could not come in through the front. And at some point, I don't know whose idea, well, it was my father's idea, which it probably was, or my grandfather, I have no idea. But they finally said, you know what, enough of this foolishness. If we want Blacks to come in our store, they come in through the front door. And there was a little nervousness regarding that. We figured, we're going to get our, the windows knocked out of our store or worse. But, I just remember, you talking about, what we did in the community. I remember that vividly when they finally made a decision. We're going to have Blacks come in the front door just like everybody else.
Yeah, we never, my friends had Black stores in the Black neighborhood, so they didn't have that problem, many of them. But yes, I remember all of the things you're talking about. Of course, all the high schools were segregated. The movie theaters were segregated. Everything was segregated in there. And then also there was the Jew and the non-Jew country clubs, areas where you would buy a home. There was areas in the Country Club of Virginia, which is one of the most prestigious clubs, was restricted, no Jews, until they built a second 18 holes down by the river, overextended themselves, went bankrupt, and a New York Jew bought them out. The first thing he did was he let Blacks in. You talk about a stinking town. Now this was back around 1975. But still, I agree with you, Jeff. I saw a lot of that kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
So we're going to move, and some of the questions we're going to ask, I may skip or alter just because you've touched upon them already. But, Harriet, I'd really be curious, one point of pride about being Jewish where you grew up, what would that be?
Well, I take pride in knowing that my family made a contribution to the communities in which they lived. I feel like now as an older person looking back, I realize how much my parents came to these towns as somebody outsider, and they lived among the community, and they respected the people that may not have had as much education or material things as they did. And as I said, my father died when he was 49. And when my mother died nearly 40 years later, people came up to my sisters and me at the funeral and said to us, your father and your mother were so important in our community. We appreciate them so much. And I know I'm the middle child of a middle generation. Life is easy. You don't tell middle children this, but it's like the older people have cleared the path. The older generation cleared it for me. As an older person now, I am so proud of what my family and other Jewish families and have always done to whatever community they moved into. They made it better. And I'm very proud of that.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much. And, Ed, we know that there was a youth group where you grew up. Jeff, you were it where you grew up.
Well, I wasn't it, but it was a small group for sure. You know, the being in youth group, you know, when you went to, you know, it opened up my eyes. Now I know it sounds crazy today because of how the ease it is to travel between cities and towns and so forth. But when I was in youth group and we were able to go to conventions in Memphis and New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Little Rock, man, that was a huge deal. I mean, huge. I mean, that was like, oh my gosh, I've gone to the candy store and they've given me free reign to get whatever I want. And you know, I was lucky. I was very lucky because I was president of the youth group. I was a member of the regional board and everything. But it opened my eyes to other things other than, you know, the little rural farming community that I grew up in. And, you know, it allowed me to go, well, that didn't allow me to go out of state to go to college, but it certainly piqued my interest about wanting to go out of state to go to college. So yeah, I have a lot of great memories from being in youth group. It was all positive.
What was it like when you went to that first convention and you're like, wow, there's a ton of other Jews here?
Scared out of my mind. You know, I had, when I graduated high school, I had an academic scholarship to go to Boston University. I'm like, no, I'm going from a town of 600 people. Why in the world would I want to ever do anything like that? You know, it was, I mean, it was a big deal. I mean, and the first time I went, yeah, I was scared to death. After that, I couldn't wait to go. I look forward to going. Like I said, it opened my eyes to a lot of things, a lot of different, you know, I was able to meet Jews from, you know, large cities, you know, Memphis, New Orleans, met Lucy, you know, and, you know, it was an eye-opening thing, and it was all positive, thankfully.
AZA conventions were absolutely the best thing in the world. We'd go on trains like to Savannah or Columbia or Charleston, and they would meet us at the trains, and, you know, it was so organized. To this day, I smile when I think of AZA conventions.
Now,
They invited all
I
the
was
girls.
disappointed. I was president of the local AZA chapter, but we had so much money that my mother knew 27 ways to make hamburger, okay? We just couldn't afford it. So I was never able to go to any of the conventions. But what AZA did for us is that was their social group, okay? All through high school, and then later, when I learned to drive, you know, you would go out with your friends from AZA. After a movie, you'd go to the local chicken place to get some chicken and so forth. So, you know, it was not that religious in any way, but it was the social community that a teenager would belong to. There was like 25 of us in the AZA chapter, you know, so it was not a small thing.
And they invited girls. It's like, I know there was a BBG, but I don't have any connection to BBG, but the boys would have these conventions, and all these girls from all these small towns would be invited to the AZA convention. So it was like no work and all play. It was great.
Now I really feel bad.
So Harriet, would people say that you were a little boy crazy back then?
Back then?
Yeah.
No, but it was fun. It was like, I lived in two worlds. My parents were so afraid I'd interfaith marry. All three of my children are interfaith married, but it's like my parents were so afraid that it was like, they were so worried about this that they were just carte blanche in letting me go to these conventions and things where I would be with other Jewish kids. And they really.
You just said something that is about as true as you can possibly make it. You had one foot in the Jewish world, you had 1 foot in the Christian world, and that's exactly what it was like.
Mhm. A counselor called it one time, nishta hin, nishta hair, and I didn't know Yiddish then, but it's like, that is my whole life. It's like neither here nor there. I was almost like the Christian friends and almost like the Jewish friends, but neither nishta hin, nishta hair.
If we could rename tonight's session, I think that's what we would title it, Harriet. Nishta here, nishta hey. So I'm curious, I'm going to move to Rob. Would you tell your children or grandchildren to live in the South? Why or why not?
Well, the answer is yes, and it's because our family roots are here. It's a simple answer. So I have
Simple as that.
three, two children in the South and one who's opted for the Northwest.
Great. Harriet, what about you? I know that might be a little
I
bit of a
wrote
moot
this
point.
down, and my grandparents left the place and the language and the customs they knew for this place, the American South. The South accepted them and allowed them to flourish and grow. Today, I have daughters in Raleigh, Atlanta, and Charlotte. I have a nephew in Alexandria, but I also have a sister and family in Lima, Peru, and a niece in Ohio. My grandchildren are finding places in the North like New York and Brooklyn and Boston. I would tell my grandchildren and great-grandchildren, because I have two little great-granddaughters, to find a place that will allow you to flourish and grow. The South was that for me, but whatever it is, make an effort to learn about the place and respect the people you find there. Then you can be happy wherever you settle.
Larry, I would say, why not? Okay. I mean, I've said this many times to certain folks. I was born and raised in the South. I went to college in the South. I married a Southerner. We raised our boys in the South. Now our grandkids in the South, and by the grace of God, I'll die in the South. I know that every region of the country has unique characteristics, but I'm a little prejudiced with this, but I don't think there's any place that is more unique than the South, and especially how the Jews are able to be incorporated into that society.
That's great. Thank you very much. I should say thank you, Cousin Jeff, because my family is from Memphis as well, and we have a common link on our family tree. So
we just found that out too.
Yeah.
And I want to know if the Barnett that Rob talked about, the Barnett family, is that Janice Barnett? Is that Lee and Janice's? Is that Janice kin?
I haven't gone back to see if we're connected there.
We
but
may be kin.
Basically,
So
my next door neighbor's daughter married Harriet's first cousin.
Mhm. So we're mishpocha anyway.
There you go.
So we're related by friendship and marriage.
Yes.
That's right. So Ed, I'm going to turn it to you for how do you respond? And I'm sure this has happened to you at some point when people say, Ed, there aren't any Jews in the South. What are you talking about?
Well, yes, it has happened. And I tell them the story that surprised me. Because I didn't think there were that many Jews in the South, because remember now, I've lived in 15 different cities and countries. So, but when I was down, I moved down to Houston to do some engineering and build a plant between Houston and Galveston. And many times people have asked me, are there Jews in the South? I was in Houston and my wife had seen a bakery and she said, why don't you go get us some croissants over at that bakery? Now it's Thursday evening around 4 o'clock, okay? And I'm over there, I go over to the bakery and I'm standing in line and I'm not paying attention. And the next thing I know, I'm hearing Yiddish. Then I look up at the board, half of the board's in Yiddish. There's such a large community of Jews down there that came in through Galveston. They got their own Jewish bakery down there, okay? And Yiddishkeit was part of their language. So I tell them that story. There are Jews everywhere. But what really surprises me, ask somebody, what percentage of the world is Jewish? And they'll tell you, oh, it must be 5 or 10%, maybe even higher. They cause so many problems. It's actually 0.02%. but the total world is Jewish. That also surprises them, but yet we seem to have Jews everywhere, maybe in small pockets someplace, and in like Richmond or New York in large pockets. Or where my family is from is Baltimore, and you're talking Baltimore, part of Baltimore is almost Baltimore, Toronto, and New York City are the big Jewish areas, okay? In fact, I had when I was up in Toronto living there, I had an accountant working for me who was Muslim, all right? Every Saturday night, I had to take her and my wife to dinner because she wanted to eat halal, and kosher is halal, and many of the restaurants in Toronto are kosher, something you don't see very often down south.
Well, Lucy's first year at rabbinical school in Israel, she went over in the summer. I came over in the fall, and she told all her friends that she had begun to make over there, well, when Jeff gets over here, you're not going to understand him. Now, you have to understand my Southern accent. If you take your stereotypical Southern accent that you see on TV that they always show with this real thick Southern drawl, Lucy said it comes out when I get upset. But it was thick. I mean, it was your stereotypical Southern drawl. You probably, if you'd have first met me when I first got out of Mississippi, you would have understand half the things I was saying. But they were like, well, first of all, he can't be really from the South because no one talks that way, and he's Jewish, so obviously he's from someplace else. And Lucy kept saying, no, he's from Mississippi. And they said, when is he going to stop putting on the act? And she would say, what act? How he talks. That's how he talks. I mean, that's, so yeah, I mean.
You've been Raleigh-fied now.
What's that?
You got the Raleigh accent now.
Oh, come on, don't be so mean.
I apologize, Jeff.
So Ed, I just want to amplify one of the things you said. The first time I was in Houston, I stopped in the Reform Synagogue in Clear Lake City, south part of Houston, right where NASA is. And just to prove they've been everywhere, one of the Jewish astronauts brought back a mezuzah that was on the space shuttle going around the world. And it was just really a beautiful, beautiful artifact in Houston. And of course, it's by NASA.
That's a pretty good sized synagogue that you're talking about. I'm remembering.
Yeah, we'll have to talk about that one. So I want to wrap up with one more question. And one of the things that Ned and I it was really important for us because we could talk about things that happen to Jews that aren't necessarily good. But there's some things that happen where there's an event and there's something that may be anti-Semitic, but someone actually comes to our aid and speaks up and really does a nice job of defending and advocating. And I'd like to hear if there's any stories around Jew advocacy for Jews from the community. And I'd love Rob and then Ed for you guys to talk about that.
Go ahead, Ed.
Well, yeah, I thought about that, and I guess I somewhat look Jewish, okay, and I was driving back from Virginia Beach, and I decided that I didn't want to go through the tunnel to get back to Richmond, and I had my girlfriend, and she was a Jewish girl that come down to RPI from New York City, and I said, come on, we'll take the back roads, because I knew all the back roads. And I'm in this traffic jam, okay? And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on? And as I'm going up there, the next thing I know, I look off to the south and they're burning crosses. This is a KKK Klan meeting, okay? Now, there was a cop directing traffic. And I think he saw that I was Jewish. There was a few things in the car that and rather than give me a hard time, he just quickly waved me through. And I thought, boy, am I lucky. I could be on that cross if we weren't careful. So that was the one time that I saw somebody that really stood out and treated me like, you know, because he could have been real nasty in that crowd.
Thanks, Ed. Rob?
Yeah, well, I don't feel like I experienced much anti-Semitism growing up in Savannah. There are two events that occurred. One, if memory serves, was after Rosh Hashanah services at the Mikveh Israel, probably in the late 50s or 60s, when we came out from services, and there were KKK meeting flyers under all the windshields around the synagogue. But it doesn't, I mean, I don't remember anybody doing anything about it, so I can't say that there was an act of kindness there. And for myself at high school, I do remember some guy probably in a locker room called me Jew boy, but nothing came of that. And nobody particularly stood up for me if they heard it, so.
You know, growing up in a small community like I did, I don't recall having any types of anti-Semitic things happening until I got to college. And, you know, I was pretty active at Memphis State University where I went to school. I was president of the Hillel. I was on the President's Council of Religious Affairs, but I was also on the Memphis State baseball team. So, you know, my name and face was not as famous as, or not as well known as basketball, but, you know, it was known. And, you know, I do remember a lot of times I would park at the Hillel house instead of my dorm after class, especially in the spring, because I'd usually have to go right from class and go to where our baseball field was to get changed for practices or games, or whatever the case may be. And I remember going there one day, and you know, a friend of mine, I had given him the keys. I said, there's a knocking noise, and he was good mechanic or whatever, even as a student. I said, I want you to take a look at something in my car. Well, I'm glad I did, because they ended up taking a bomb out of my car.
Mm.
Wow.
My parents are both deceased now. They never knew about that, because I knew if I had told them, they had known about that, they'd have yanked me out of there. You know, my feet wouldn't hit the ground between Memphis and Anguilla at any point. They'd have yanked me out of there. You know, so fortunately, you know, nothing happened, but I have threats. I was having threats made against me. And the nice thing that happened was my baseball coach was, in his words, a born-again Christian. I mean, teetotaling, Bible-thumping, born-again Christian. Of course, he'd make a sailor blush too, but that's beside the point. But I remember when that happened, I was late to practice that day, obviously, but he had already gotten word of what had happened. And he had already called the players before I even got there. The president of the university knew what had happened. Other members of the faculty that I was involved with in different committees and so forth knew what had happened. And it was like the wagons got circled around me. And I just thought that was I didn't expect that, to be honest with you. I didn't expect the bomb either, you know, but I was really touched by, you know, I mean, I was not allowed to go. Somebody on the baseball team, or two or three, were always with me wherever I went, well, on campus to classes or whatever the case may be, for quite a long time, because they didn't know what was going to happen. And fortunately, nothing did ever happen, you know, as far as anybody putting their hands on me, thankfully. But, you know, that was, I mean, the whole university kind of, well, not all, but you know what I'm saying? I mean, it was a collective effort to make sure that nothing ever happened, thankfully.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. We're done with the formal questions in there. I'll share what on that topic, something act of kindness when I lived in Winchester, Virginia, which isn't on the list of Ed's towns that have Jews, but Winchester, Virginia.
Northern Virginia.
What's that?
That's Northern Virginia.
It is that's true. So town of 30,000 people, and, a synagogue of maybe 80 people, not even families. And the first day of school was scheduled to be on Rosh Hashanah. And the rabbi called up and said, our students our Jewish students are going to miss the first day. That's a very difficult thing. Is there anything you can do? And they said, isn't Rosh Hashanah 2 days? And the rabbi said, yeah, but we only do one. And they said, all right, we'll delay the start of school by 2 days, just in case someone is observant. And, it was such an act of kindness and understanding that, you really remember those things. And I just thought that was really neat, whether that's south or north, because we're so close to the Mason-Dixon line up there. I thought it was pretty neat. So with that,
I forgot about Winchester, but Winchester, like Roanoke and Danville, they weren't really small towns of like what Jeff is talking about, but they were small enough that they would have maybe a small community of 80, 90, 100 Jews, unlike Richmond, which had thousands.
Absolutely. So I want to, thank everybody. We're 9 minutes away from our scheduled or scheduled departure time. I really want to thank Harriet and Rob and Jeff and Ed for their
It was
participation.
fun. It was
Nice.
fun.
Yeah, we really just enjoyed. We learned a lot. Annette, thank you so much for organizing it. And Stan, thank you very much for coordinating as part of Adult Ed. Is there any, we probably have time for one question. Anyone want to throw one out?
We do have some questions in the chat. We have a question from Judy Jacobs. Is Raleigh more like Savannah or Richmond? Do one of you want to answer that on the panel?
It's
I would say Raleigh is probably more like Richmond than it was Savannah, because it was like, before I got here, it was like there was this community. It was not a very welcoming community to Jews, I don't think.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Okay. Annette, can I make a comment, Annette? So I wasn't raised in the South. I'm a Brooklyn guy, but I have a Southern Jewish story. I did basic training at Fort Gordon in Augusta, Georgia.
So did my husband.
And the Jewish community in Augusta invited the servicemen for services on Saturday mornings. And of course, we were released to go. And when we got there, we found out it wasn't services. It was their country club, and they were trying to marry off their daughters to Jews. That's what it was all
My
about.
husband,
So then we go back and we tell the drill instructor, that it was, very holy and all that.
my husband was at Fort Gordon, and his sergeant was not Jewish, and his sergeant wanted to go with him because they served such good food.
Yeah, it was a great afternoon, especially during basic training.
Well, just to add to that story, my mother, during World War II, organized USO events at the synagogue for Jewish soldiers who were stationed out at Fort Stewart, which is how she met my father.
How nice.
Oh, that's Hinesville.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very similar experience, Larry, to what you were talking about when school started on Rosh Hashanah. It wasn't when I was a kid, but Stan and I lived in Miami for quite a number of years. And we were at a Miami football game, and we found out that the next game was going to be on Rosh Hashanah, like at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I actually called the president, it was Donna Shalala at the time, at the university, and I told her how disgraceful it was because the Jewish community was celebrating Rosh Hashanah, and how could you do a football game? It is just not right. So she went on to explain how they're set for like a year or two in advance, the games, and I said, well, I think it's something that you need to consider and you need to fix it. And she called me 3 days later to tell me they moved the game to the afternoon.
Evening, nice.
Evening, so that it would not interfere with Rosh Hashanah services.
And of course, Miami is a pretty big Jewish community there, and the university is well attended by Jews also.
So Karen, I saw your hand up. You'll be the last question.
Yes, I had a question for Jeff. You said your car was parked in front of the Hillel house. Do you think that's why a bomb was placed in it? Not personal to you?
No, it was personal to me because that was not the first thing that had happened. I had, you know,
Ah, okay.
I'd had some other issues. People, handful of people that we had a group on campus called Maranatha. It was a kind of a cultish. I don't know technically what it was, but they were opposed for me. You know, they were openly opposed and vehemently opposed to me being on the president's council of religious affairs, and there were all kinds of, there were some, probably about 3 or 4 things that had happened. Yeah, they were very much the police and folks that looking into it. They said it was definitely a target. It wasn't just because the car was having to be in front of Hillel. It was because it was my car sitting in front of Hillel, and it was one of those bombs where you turn the key on and it goes boom. You know. And you know, I was lucky. All there was to it.
But that was in Memphis, the city of Memphis.
Yeah,
Memphis,
and Memphis had
which has a lot of Jews.
Memphis has a very large Jewish population, but
right.
like I said, you know, you got crazies everywhere. You know, but
I'm into that.
You know, but that was kind of like the culmination of all the issues, all the things that were coming in my direction. And, you know, fortunately, I just had some really good people around me who, unfortunately, the unfortunate thing is they never caught who did it. That was the sad part. I wish they'd have done that, but, you know.
Thank God you lived to tell the story.
Oh, thank God, yes.
Oh, yeah, me too.
So as we wrap up here, I want to do, first of all, thank Larry and Annette for putting this together, coming up with the questions, finding out panelists, coming up with the whole idea of Shalom, y'all. You know, we had 41 screens last week. We had 40 tonight. And this is like a record for adult ed. And come back next week because we're going to finish this program next week with another great speaker. And keep watching for the adult ed stuff. We got Lexi next month.
Oh, yeah.
And she will sing as part of our program.
Right.
So thank you, Rob, Harriet, Ed, and Jeff, Larry, and Annette. Thank you so much. It was a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for the panelists.
I would like to say something. Hi there. I'd like to say something.
Sure.
Hi there. I'm Amy Rose, and I grew up in Danville, Virginia, which is 70 miles northwest of here. I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 1963. So when my parents moved to Danville back in like the mid 50s, my parents were Northerners. My mom was from Baltimore. My dad was from New York. And so it was a culture shock. My father was a podiatrist. And at that time, when I was growing up, just about the whole downtown Danville was Jewish merchants. And on high holy days, you'll pick up the newspaper, clothes, you know, the Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. You always would see clothes for the religious holidays. So that was always nice. And also in Danville, there was like, I don't know, about maybe, in my congregation, there were 75 families. There were 2 congregations in that town. The town was, when I was growing up, was about maybe 47,000. And there was 2 congregations. One was the Orthodox, and then there was the Reform. And my parents were conservative, and they really never felt comfortable in either, because in the Orthodox, they were, men and women were separate and just didn't feel like family oriented. And then at the Reform, they had the big organ playing every Friday night, and then they had a choir. And then about 25 miles was Martinsville, Virginia, which had a conservative. We had a dear friend there, and we sometimes went to services in Martinsville, Virginia. And growing up, it was a lot of Jewish merchants then, but you know, everything has changed.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Mary.
sharing, Amy.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to share with you what it was like growing up. You know, I was my sister was like 2 years older than me. She had more Jews in her class, but I was the only one in my class. And in one of my classes, there was this girl, Susan Greenberg, and her grandfather married a non-Jewish woman. It was like they married, it was in secret and no one knew it. And she was active in the Baptist church. And here I was going to school with Susan Greenberg, who looked more Jewish than I did. And her family was real big in the Baptist church. She always wore a big cross. So, you know, there were a couple of kids in my class who were, whose grandfathers were Jewish, but they were active in the Christian faith. So that was real interesting.
Thank you for sharing.
All right.
So I just
Well,
thought
think
Thank you. Thank you all so much for attending and coming to listen to our panelists
Yeah.
and
Please
and
come
our,
back
yes,
next week.
come next week and
This
you'll
was
hear.
so great.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you, thank you. What a
Bye,
weekend.
all. It was lovely.
Well,
Thank you so
Everybody.
much.
Fabulous, thank you.
Thank you. It was great. It's real interesting.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.